Hey guys, welcome back. BDCKR here. We're back with Season 7, Episode 22 of our weekly Q&A videos. As always, if you are on, I guess I shouldn't say just videos, it's videos and podcast.
Right.
That plays into what I'm about to say, which is if you're currently on the YouTube video and you want to access this on any of the major podcasting platforms, you can go ahead and check out the links in the description for that. You can download them, you can listen to them on the go. You don't have to watch our gameplay. For the people who complain that it's always the same, you just can look at nothing instead. So that's sort of maybe not a great solution for anybody who actually cares about the gameplay, but you know, it's always an option for you.
A special treat for this week is that the gameplay is the tail end of last season, and finishing up in right at the end of the season, so you can see the finish in the top 10.
Yeah, so there we go.
Yeah.
Just starting out here, you have something that you actually want to talk about before you get into the questions.
Yeah, so lately we've been talking about just stuff that's been happening in the last week or so. So it's been out. So Ada Palmer is a history professor, but also an award-nominated, I think, award-winning science fiction author, plus a manga specialist, and her area of expertise is the Renaissance.
Yeah, so lots of very disparate interests that have been turned into
I was late finding this. Apparently, this came out more than a month ago. But she wrote a couple of articles. But the one that I want to focus on is called,
and we'll have this linked in the description and in the in the top right.
Healthy Work Habits and Self-Care Guide for the Pandemic Crisis. And it was meant for the faculty, I think, and maybe students at University of Chicago, or is it Chicago University? I never
one of the two.
Yeah. So, but what I want to point out and why I'm linking it to for everybody is that it is absolutely brilliant. So and I appreciate this way more after having been involved in helping develop and review policies at work. But it is full of great ideas. It is clear. It's concise. It's organized. It's a pleasure to read, but that's obviously no surprise for somebody who's a really good lecturer and a really good writer. It's chock full of practical examples of things that you can do that illustrate each point that she's making. So the reason why I wanted to point it out is, one, it's useful right now because I think a lot of people are under stress because of the pandemic. But I also think that these are really useful self-care suggestions, or I was going to say guidelines. I guess guide isn't the name, so that's a fair way to describe it. But they are good for any time, because it's not just
best practices.
I think so. It's not just during a pandemic. I mean, during a pandemic, there's more people stressed, and people are under more stress and unprecedented stress, at least in our lifetimes. But it's great ideas, and again, what really sets it apart is how practical it is, where it talks about examples of, like, one thing it says, not every hour of every day is your most productive. And one of the things you can do, and this is one thing I've always recommended people do when I talk to them about exercise, is if you track what you're doing, you'll have a better idea of what's actually working for you and whether you're making any progress. And she's using that same idea where she's talking about, if you keep track of what's happening each day, when things are going well or things are not going well, then you might have a better idea of what things are actually better for you and helpful for you, and maybe even what hours are the most productive. So you don't spend, because you spend more time doing it doesn't mean you actually get more done, because at some point you're going to have diminishing returns, and that's going to happen even more when you're working with, the expression I think is spoons, where people, have you heard that?
Yeah, like, I don't know the spoons for this. It's like a mental health shorthand for like capacity, basically.
Right. Yeah. So again, that's just one example. It's a much longer article. Anybody listening to this really should read it. I think if you're coming at it with an open mind, you're going to find lots of great suggestions, and I'm sure that you're going to find at least one thing that maybe you hadn't thought of that you can find useful to help take care of yourself. Yeah.
So there we go. Okay. I think that is good, unless you have anything else that you want to say about that.
Not this week. Has anything else been going on?
I don't think that much specifically, no.
Yeah, it's funny because I feel like we're getting sort of burnt out from the news, where so many different things happen. Well, sports. Raptors are actually now in second place. They've established their seed. They know exactly who they're going to face in playoffs. So the last 2 games are meaningless. And I'm feeling very hopeful that they have a pretty good chance of repeating this year.
Okay, so that's exciting.
Yeah, and Major League Baseball, I think they're totally blowing it. I think the NBA is doing it right, where they're trying to work with a small environment and controlling it, despite being in the middle of a hot zone.
Yeah.
In Florida, that Major League Baseball, where they're having people move around and go from city to city, it's not working out. There's been so many outbreaks on different teams and so many games that have already been lost on what's already a shortened season.
Yeah.
That again, it feels like the NBA has been a bit of a leader in that respect.
Mm-hmm.
So
there we go.
Yeah.
Our first question of the week comes from Kiduba Modilim. I'm not sure exactly how to pronounce
it's interesting.
that.
All right, so CHI
could be Ki, Chi,
yeah,
Kai.
Yeah. So it depends on where the root is.
Yeah.
Any guesses?
So
I don't recognize
I have no
it.
clue.
Nothing looks familiar.
But yeah, if they want to let us know how to pronounce their name, love to hear it in the comments, and we do make our best effort to at least try to pronounce people's names correctly.
It's the least we can do. It's not doesn't take a lot of effort.
They say, lovely video, BDCKR. I wanted to ask for your opinion on glitches, cheating, hacking, and the difference between them. Not sure if you've already done a video on them, but if you have, could you link me to it? Also, do challenge resets count as cheating? So, we have talked about this before.
And in the original comments,
yeah,
we've also linked to a video where we talked about it at length, but that was back in November 2018.
Yeah, so, but I do think we could have a condensed version. I think we've talked about it enough that we can have sort of like a short version of how we feel about everything and what the difference is and why it matters.
So maybe before we get into that, do you feel like our thinking's evolved at all, say, in the last couple of years?
I don't know. I think for me, the most part, I can't remember when I felt a significantly different way about all these and their sort of relationship. How about you?
No, I mean, here's the thing. I think that I have a clear idea in my mind, but over time I feel like I figure out different ways to articulate it more clearly.
That's fair. Yeah. So glitches and hacking are the easiest to distinguish, right? Cheating is sort of cheating is a lot more nebulous. It's more not playing by the rules, right?
And so it's broader. It's more it encompasses a lot more. I mean, I think all glitches and hacking falls under cheating.
Yeah. And so glitches are when you're exploiting anything only using tools within the game, either intentional or unintentional. So when it's like a combination of multiple mechanics that aren't meant to like do the thing that they end up doing when you put them together. It's when you look at like for speedruns of video games, right? When people find ways to get through walls, right? That's all glitching, and that is also cheating.
So maybe we need to make that distinction too, right? Because language matters. So there's going to be glitches. I mean, we're talking about glitches in a very specific way.
Exploitable glitches.
Yeah, and that a lot of people maybe in the context of injustice, there's vocabulary that's built up that's pretty consistent. But I think people coming to it who aren't maybe as rooted in injustice, it's different because glitches encompass like bugs, stuff that's just visually interesting that doesn't actually affect the gameplay. Right?
Most of the time, glitches are things that happen to you more than things that you seek out.
Right.
But there is a sort of narrow range of glitches that can potentially provide effects that are largely positive to the person doing them and that they try to reproduce. So glitches are cheating. Hacking is also cheating. Right. Glitches all happens within the game. Hacking is where you have to go to an external source, like other software, if you are, editing the code directly yourself, right? Something like that, where you're going outside the game to do something in the game, and you're going outside the game and also outside what the sort of standard tool set that your phone gives you. So if you're changing date and time, that's still more glitching than anything else. Right. You're messing up the game's internal clock, but you're doing it using only tools that are like default on your phone. Right. Whereas downloading a program that lets you access and change specific chunks of code is hacking. And
whether it's changing the code where you actually know that you're changing the code, or whether it's sort of one step removed and you just tell it that you want it to do something, and it does it for you.
Yeah.
That's still hacking, right? So you're going to include stuff like, do you include script kiddie stuff?
Yeah, I
under
do.
Hacking?
Hacking more than cheating, yeah, because it's using external tools.
So, and just for the definition again, too, script kiddies covers things like
People who are just using software. It's like user friendly.
Yeah,
it's like the halfway point in between glitching and hacking, where
Right.
it's something that's been streamlined by somebody else, and somebody else has done almost all the work, and it's just learning how to use a software.
Right. And the most common example of that would be using software that lets you make in-app purchases without actually spending money.
Yeah. And so what we feel about I feel the same way in general about all cheating as a baseline, and how much I care about it is based off of what the results are and not what the actual process is. So I think glitching is more frequently okay simply because everybody has access to it.
Right. So it's a type of cheating that's more egalitarian because basically it's short a little bit of knowledge, anybody could potentially be doing it.
But for me, the line that I draw, it's always okay, in my opinion, for an individual to make the choice for themselves to glitch or hack if they are not negatively impacting any other players.
Right.
And it is always not okay if they are demonstrably, or, you know, you can see exactly why their play would be negatively impacting other players, the decisions they're making. And I think glitches more often than not are not negatively impacting other players, but sometimes are. And if they are, then it's still bad. And hacking I think has a much higher chance of directly negatively impacting other players. But even if it's not, then I don't have any issue with it. So people who have been following us for a long time will know that when new stuff would come out in the game, we knew somebody who would hack in content and who would give us accounts with content that hadn't been released yet, so we could show it off. And people who have watched any of those videos will also know that we never took it online. We never put it in a team that would leave it in online so that other people would be facing it. We never gave any way of that content getting out and into sort of online play, where we would have something that other real life people would interact with that they couldn't have. Right? And so, in general, I think glitches and hacking can both be really positive things, right? Like making mods for a game is essentially hacking, right? And in a lot of cases, what that does is opens up a huge avenues of content. It keeps a community alive. The glitch community itself, for us on Injustice, has been a hugely positive force in this channel, and you know, by extension, just like our personal lives.
So you mentioned mods, but isn't the difference then in mods versus hacking, where mods are implicitly or explicitly endorsed by the developers, right?
Mods aren't always endorsed by the developers, though.
Isn't that so? Maybe I'm getting the language wrong then, because
mod just means modifying. You're just making modifications to a game.
Oh,
so it's, you know, you could be adding new features, you could be removing stuff, but it doesn't have to be endorsed by the developers at all. And in a lot of cases, in recent years, it's become increasingly endorsed by developers. But, you know, there can be mod communities in games where the creators don't like mods, you know? So really, that's what it is. So in a single player game, I don't care what anybody does ever, right? Unless you're trying to like pass off an achievement as done without glitches when it isn't, for like speedruns.
Because then it's not so much the cheating that's done it, it's what you do with it afterwards.
Yeah, it's the problem. That it at some point causes harm to somebody else or impacts their experience of the game in a negative way. So, you know, that's how we generally feel. That's the distinction between each one. And I think that definition serves us pretty well, and I think it's also a good guide for any given action, whether or not it's okay to take it. So, for example, there's a glitch that would let you skip battles in Injustice. And so it would let you skip online battles too. And we demonstrated the glitch, but we always recommended people not do it for online battles, because then you have to engage in the glitch to be competitive, because you can do battles so much faster than anybody could practically complete them in real time, and so you could spend a fraction as long and get way more battle points. That was not a good glitch to do, because it negatively impacted people.
And it would negatively impact you, actually, I think, right? Because there was the potential for getting your account suspended from that.
Yeah, but honestly, anybody who's skipping online battles and gets their account suspended, who's screwing up...
It seems like a fair punishment outcome.
And then there's a bunch of glitching that's been fine. and there's a bunch of hacking that's fine. Like, I have no way of knowing if people hack in like Elite 7, level 50, like default gold characters. And frankly, I don't care very much if they do. But then there was people who were hacking in characters that you couldn't get, or gear that had never been released, or the boss Ares, right? And making really weird fights, or hacking in battle points and bringing themselves to the top of the leaderboard. And so there's all those hacking that's bad, and then there's also a genre of hacking in which I think is totally harmless and I have no issue with. So that's our opinion. That's what they are. I don't know if I have anything else to say.
I want to speak to something that you mentioned earlier about the impact on others, right? And does it matter? Because I think as it stands, that's really clear. You've got a really bright line to make the distinction.
Yeah.
But what about unintended consequences? So indirect stuff where if you were to make the argument that there's certain glitches that would have an impact on the game, so that, let's say you do better because you're using glitch. You glitch, you get better gear, you get better characters, and now when you play in the multiplayer season, you get more points per fight, and that potentially displaces somebody who would have gotten higher and pushes them down.
Yeah.
So do you think that matters?
I do think it matters some. And I do think it definitely makes a lot of those questions more complicated.
Yeah.
But I think, to me, the thing that's important is at the end of the day, they're not negatively impacted in any significant way, and they're not aware of it. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So I think if, there are...
That matters too, right?
Yeah.
Like, to me, that's... If you look at it more as the suckage in the world.
Yeah, so I don't think anybody who sees other people spending all their actual time playing, getting legitimate wins in online multiplayer, who are ranking below people who are spending all that time and all the battle points that they've earned, in and of themselves are legitimate.
Yeah.
Nobody's looking at that and going, "Oh man, I'm only getting this low because they used a glitch and they have slightly better characters earlier than they should."
Right.
And so they're not
it's so mature a game.
They're not having they're not having a more negative experience than they would if that person wasn't there. Right. There's only ever going to be like one person who is right at the cutoff, right? Who is like one battle point or however, like whatever the minimum number of battle points is. Is it 500 point increments?
I don't know.
Who is however many points away from being in the next bracket up. Right? And for that person, they might feel like a little bit worse if they're right on the edge. But pretty much everybody, when you're only looking at legitimately earned battle points, is feeling bad about the place that they got.
Right.
Because they are like that, like 1% like lower than they wanted to be, and they're in the slightly lower reward bracket. So I don't think that's actually causing any meaningful negative impact in the playstyle. Whereas, if you look where the people were hacking in a functional way, which was like to get right at the top, right? People who are grinding really, really hard to get like first place, second place, third place are directly negatively impacted. So there's a noticeable negative impact. So that indirect stuff, I think, still matters if you are aware of it. And I think in the case of online multiplayer, nobody who is being bumped down, if it's, 1, 5, 10, 100 people, knows and is aware and is sad because of it. So I don't think it matters the same way.
I think there's another argument to be made too, where when you're working with glitches, where it's what's in the game.
Yeah.
Right? It's how the game functions. That because it's accessible to everybody, that it's more important that everybody, if a number of people are using it, that more people know about it, so that it's more of a level playing field.
Yeah.
So that people have the opportunity to actually compete at that level. Because again, most of the glitches, well, I think all the glitches that we publicized had less of a direct effect, but you can make the argument that it had a lot of indirect effect. And I think that's an interesting point you brought up that I hadn't thought of before, considering how many times we've talked about it.
Yeah.
That part of what makes things better or worse when we're talking about a game is how much it affects the way people enjoy the game.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so even if there is like a slight negative impact, I think if it doesn't impact the way that they experience the game at all, then their joy from it is exactly the same, even if mechanically they might have a few less credits or something like that.
Yeah. So, all right, so that reminds me of something else that happened this week. So I finally got around to watching the last season of The Good Place.
Yeah.
And why it made me think of that was the idea of ethics and the different kinds of
like moral systems.
Yeah, the moral, whether it's, you know, the rules are always important, doesn't matter what you do as long as you follow the rules, versus consequentialism, where it's the outcome that matters, right?
Yeah, so this is very like consequentialist / utilitarian.
Yeah, I love that show.
It's a great show. It was a really, really well done show.
And so what's interesting to me about The Good Place was how well they navigated the shift in the kind of story that we're telling each season.
Yeah.
And I remember we were having this discussion, and I brought it up, is that there's those shows that are one thing, and the most common one thing that they are, where they have trouble shifting gears.
It's like a sitcom, like a will they, won't they relationship.
Right. So they're good at working with the tension of that kind of romantic entanglements that are complicated. And they do a very poor job when they shift to, okay, now they're together, because it's a different kind of story.
It's a different dynamic.
Yeah, and it's not that that dynamic is that you can't do something good with it. Because let me give you an example.
There's a lot of great romance stories.
Yeah, and not just thwarted romances, but actually where they're a couple. Like I'm thinking back to a sitcom back in the '90s. It was relatively popular then. What
was it called?
Mad About You.
Okay.
And I think it's lost any kind of relevance now, because I don't know why. The last few seasons were never released on. I guess they were released really cheaply on DVD, but not from a major distributor or producer. And so, have you heard about it?
No, I have no clue. I've heard about it from you, I'm pretty sure, but
yeah.
Like,
so
other than that,
it's
not at all.
Paul Reiser, Helen Hunt. They were a couple in New York. They were together. They were, for most of the 7th season, I think they were pretty happy together. So that's the step that's supposed to happen, or not supposed to, that's possible after, you know, Sam and Diane and Cheers, Maddie and Maddie. Oh my God, Moonlighting.
I don't know who you're talking about.
It was Bruce Willis.
It doesn't matter.
Anyways, so, but that was sort of big. And Moonlighting does not age well. I tried watching again. It is so bad. The Suck Fairy got to it so hard. And so The Good Place does this amazing job of, so, you know, one season you think it's one thing. The next season you think it's something else. And then it changes each time.
It consistently changes its entire format, right? And pretty much the only thing that stays consistent, I think, is the characters.
Right.
And it's just like the core cast is always the same, but the situation they're in is so vastly different, and there's a really strong, like, narrative push forwards and to keep changing. And each season is something, like, very, very different from the last one.
Yeah, and it pays off so nicely at the end. It's a moment, I really like when shows do this, where they spend however long letting you get to know them.
Yeah.
And then they do something with it at the end, where it actually has value, so it matters that you got to know them.
Yeah, The Good Place has an incredibly strong ending. I think it does a really, really good job with it. Like, better than most shows. It's able to take the time and space that it needs to end it in a really, really sort of final but proper way.
Yeah, and what I'm trying to figure out, because I've been sort of working this in my work, sort of working with this in my head a little bit, trying to figure out what it was that felt so different. Because I think usually the shows that I really like, where I come away from it saying, wow, that was great, is that shows that have really sort of moved me in big ways, where I don't necessarily feel manipulated, but I know I've been manipulated to feel very strongly about things. And what's interesting about Good Place is I never had those kind of really sort of gut-wrenching moments.
Yeah.
But it came to a place at the end where I really felt satisfied with the entire arc. Like, there was something about it that was just...
Well, what I think it is, for me, is when I look at the way that you have to end most stories. A lot of stories try to send off their characters, right?
Right.
And I think the problem is, in a lot of stories, there's so much more to tell. They focus on a lot of, you know, it's the type of people that are on TV. So it's the vast majority are like relatively like young adult, attractive people, right?
So we're talking comedies.
Yeah. for that whole genre.
Yeah.
And so you can't. The series is going to end before they grow into a comfortable old age and sort of are able to settle down, right? Most shows don't get to that point with their characters because you'd have to last for like decades, right, to get to that. So you have to give a send off to a character who has so much more to do. Right? And it feels like they have an absolute massive amount of life ahead of them. There's no reason why the rest of their life should be any less exciting than it has been for all the time you've seen them on screen. Right? And you just sort of have to leave them to go off on what seems like a bunch more adventures that you're just never going to see.
And I guess as soon as you say stuff like that, I think of counter examples, like the Golden Girls. But where there was a bunch of women who were senior citizens living in a retirement facility. But so... Yeah, it's not that there aren't stories like that can be very successful. It's just that those are more common, right?
And they're harder to end.
Right. So, but then you can have brilliant examples where they don't have to end, like Better Call Saul.
Yeah.
As an extension or sort of a prequel to Breaking Bad.
Yeah. And so the problem is when you have to end shows like that, it's really sort of hard because the way that you end shows is that people leave or things stay the same, but you feel like you're not watching it, and those are both bittersweet, right? And the other way is like, people could die potentially, right? Is how stories can end. And no matter what, it feels like there's more going on that you don't get access to. But the way that The Good Place is, because, for anybody who's seen any of it, they know it's about the afterlife. Right? You already start with the point that, like, all your characters are already dead.
Right.
And this is all stuff that's happening after that. And I think it's such a weird setup where who they are and sort of the place in their life they are, the stage in their life that they're at, is not something that has even like a clear off-road, right? Like what happened? You're in like your eternal reward or punishment or what? Like when you're in the afterlife, and the whole point of it is that it's supposed to go on forever, right? So it's almost in this sort of like it's the conceit puts them in the same stasis that an actual sitcom normally puts its characters in, where they're not aging, and you're just supposed to imagine that this lasts forever exactly the same way that it has. Right? And so it lets them do something really interesting when they break that mold, and without, talking about what the ending actually is. Like, it sets them up in this really interesting way where the things that happen to your characters after the camera stops rolling almost by definition are not any of the normal ways that you could end a sitcom.
Right.
So you're already starting out in a really weird place, and they get to do some interesting stuff with it. And I think the way that they position them as being in the afterlife and everything, lets them do a lot of really weird stuff with it that doesn't break the immersion at all if you've bought into like literally like the first episode's conceit. Right. Whereas if you had like a show, like a normal sitcom, end with how their afterlife goes, that would be terrible. That would be such a bad ending, right? Like if you tried to get to the point that The Good Place needs you to be at to accept the ending, in like Scrubs, and the thing about Scrubs was they said they all died, and here's how their afterlife went eventually, right? That would suck.
Oh, I never saw that.
Well,
spoiler alert.
No, they didn't, right? I'm assuming. I didn't watch Scrubs, so maybe they all die at the end, but I don't believe so. But if you did that would be terrible, right? So The Good Place is, I think, uniquely positioned to do some narrative stuff with the ending that almost any other sitcom couldn't do.
Because I don't think I've ever felt as satisfied with an ending of a show that I liked as I did with that.
Yeah, it's really hard to describe how good it was without spoiling everything about it.
Yeah, because I what's interesting too is I finished watching it for the first time.
Yeah.
And you finished watching it for the second time.
Yeah.
And so part of the joy of the show is that it is doing something that hasn't been done before. Like it's taking on, at least not in TV. So it's doing this whole story, and there's a joy of discovery. Mm-hmm. And the different perspective you bring to it is, because you were saying right after I finished my first rewatch and you finished your second one, was that it still held up really well, despite knowing where things were going.
Because it has a lot of the sort of mainstays of like a good sitcom, of liking the characters and liking their dynamic. Mm-hmm. And watching it the first time versus watching it the second time, one thing that I can say is that watching it now is the best time to watch The Good Place. Watching it as it came out was a very different experience, and I think it actually works. It's a lot stronger, I think, consumed not like all at once, like not a full binge, but consumed as like, like an episode a night, or just watching it regularly whenever you felt like it for exactly as long as you wanted, right? And then taking a break from it.
So doing it on your schedule instead of on theirs.
Yeah, was really good because I remember. Okay, so spoilers for The Good Place now, I guess. Skip ahead like a few minutes if you like check the description. Like hopefully Daniel O gets to this by the time you're watching this. If you don't want spoilers for The Good Place, then you can skip ahead past the spoiler, and we'll try to include in the description if we remember when we stop. But spoilers for season 2. I remember watching it the first time and having real issues with the first few episodes of season 2 and having to wait for how they handle it because they reset their memories and it felt like we were going back to stage 1.
Right.
It felt like we were going back to a place where all the progress of the first season was just nothing. And the way that the first few episodes go with them doing resets over and over and over again, the only character who has any growth is a literal demon.
Right.
And we don't actually get the main characters that we're supposed to be rooting for at that point to have anything. They're just in complete stasis. They spend each reboot, right? It's almost played off like a joke, but it felt really sort of unsatisfying to me to hit that point and go, okay, well, what was the whole first season for?
Felt a little cheated.
Yeah, I did.
Yeah.
Because what really held it up was the strength of the characters, and so we go through this whole season of like Eleanor like learning to be better, and then all of a sudden, with like a literal snap of the fingers, it's all gone, right? And we have to see that sort of built halfway or in different versions over and over and over again, and it was interesting, but it didn't feel good as somebody who was invested in the characters and cared about them, right? It felt like I had to throw sort of all of that understanding of them in the garbage.
It's almost ironic too, right? How within the show there are other specific examples where things explicitly get better and more complicated with reboots.
Yeah, that
right?
is. Yeah.
Okay.
And so they sort of go funny. They go back and forth on the idea of resetting people for the entire course of the show, and it's really cool. I think once you get used to it in season 2. When they keep doing it and when they, have their memories reset and go back down to Earth and they get brought together, I think that feels a lot better because they're going really fast into sort of the character growth.
Right.
But I'm watching it the second time, that discomfort that I had with the feeling that their characters were being reset was totally gone because I knew what the arc was. So I was able to appreciate the characters and I was able to appreciate this moment in their stories. Without feeling like I was being robbed because I knew they would bring it back around. Right? So that part was actually a lot better to watch. And I didn't realize until I had gotten through it that the first time I watched it, I felt like it was an issue. Right? Because it didn't feel like an issue the second time with the knowledge of the show that I had.
Right.
So in that specific chunk of it was actually a lot better and a lot more enjoyable the second time around as opposed to the first.
All right, that's cool.
Yeah. And the twists are not... They're really integral to the story, but they're not important for making the story good. So it's still good without the twists. It's still good if you know all the twists ahead of time.
So the twists are because that's sort of the direction that it goes, but it's not what actually defines your joy in the journey.
Yeah, because there's so much good comedy. There's so much interesting character development. There's the characters are really people that you enjoy spending time with.
Right.
And so all of that stays. And the twists were a lot of the drama and the excitement and the real sort of push to watch the next episode as soon as it came out.
Right.
When I first watched the show. But the second time around, it was just as funny, just as, just as easy to watch. And sort of, it was lighter. It was a lot lighter, already knowing where everything goes.
Right.
But it was...
So you could enjoy the moment and not be stressed about where you thought it might potentially end up in the wrong place.
It was a lot more leisurely, but still very entertaining.
Right.
So that's the end of our spoilers at 33 minutes and 36 seconds.
And not so much a spoiler, but it's interesting now that I've seen it, that I see also how Chidi's character dressed as a mailman is being used as a poster boy to support the United States Postal Service, which is potentially being undermined as we speak in the lead up to the U.S. election, presidential election.
So I'm actually going to say that that's part of the spoiler too. If we're gonna push the spoiler break back.
Well, no, it's just a costume.
Yeah, people are going to be confused. I'm going to say the spoiler ending is right at 34 minutes because that costume, it's not a big spoiler, but you'll be expecting that. And when you first start watching the show, you'll have no clue where that comes in, right? So it'll be very confusing for you if you're looking out for it as you start it.
But we should say, just to be really clear, we highly recommend the show. If you haven't seen The Good Place, I think you really should give it a chance.
Yeah, from the guy who did Brooklyn Nine-Nine and worked on The Office.
Oh, Michael Schur?
Michael Schur, yeah.
Okay.
He's done a lot of great work, and you don't have to worry about whether or not it's problematic like people do with Brooklyn Nine-Nine now.
Yes, that is...
That's been like a real discussion, right?
Yeah, it has. And I don't think we have time for that to get into. I haven't really given it much thought, but yeah, it's been sort of percolating in my mind too about how it's, whether it's possible to enjoy something like Brooklyn Nine-Nine given where everything is right
like
now.
Responsibly, basically.
Yeah.
So there we go. Our next question comes from DuckXMS.
And I should point out, DuckXMS seems like a relatively new viewer. Had a barrage of questions, I think, maybe in an attempt to get something here. And I think there's a couple of interesting questions.
Yeah, so we'll answer a couple questions. We don't have time, I think, to get to all of them, but
yeah,
we do appreciate the engagement, Duck.
The attempt, at least, yeah.
No, I appreciate the engagement, and not every question has to get on the show for it to be worthwhile to ask it, I think, in the first place. So I appreciate it wholesale, I think.
Very good.
So, Duck, first question, is Aquaman better at damage over time than Catwoman?
Too many skins to say. I mean, it's a funny question about how things have changed based on the skins, the passives, and the gears that have come out.
Yeah, I think for a lot of the skins, for the best of each of them, there are teams that they are each better on, and it doesn't matter which one's better at damage over time. I think my answer to this question is which one is better at damage over time almost doesn't matter. It's how they complement their team, because they both do... The most important part of the way that we use the damage over time is the extra damage, right? Whether we're using it on the same character and then making use of it right away, or if we're swapping out and letting a different character deal the damage.
Right.
So I think from a pure damage over time perspective, they're both about as good as each other, because you can use the same number of special ones, right? As long as you're knocking out the same number of people or not knocking out the same number of people.
They're both bleeds on special one.
They're both bleeds, so they do the exact same thing. So I would say that they're both approximately as good as each other, and the important part is all the stuff surrounding the damage over time, and not just the damage over time itself.
Right.
So to answer that question,
for
the better ones, exactly as good as each other.
And
just from a damage over time perspective.
So let's say, to me, the best, if you're going to look at doing the most damage over time, the best one is Arkham Knight Catwoman.
Yeah.
Because it won't rinse. You are guaranteed to get the damage, and you don't need anything else to do it. On an Arkham team, she gets even better. Again, bleed, I think, is the absolute best damage over time. It stacks.
Yeah.
However, the things where Aquaman is different and in some ways more fun, with Tantu Totem and Master's Death card, the ability to send in, I think it's Aquaman Prime, to send in the Atlantean hero repeatedly over and over again, and then each time you send him in, swap him out immediately, Aquaman not only gets to do a special one, so plenty of bleed damage without any consequence, because he can tag in his meat shield to eat it, and then do it over. That is so much fun. I mean, you wouldn't want to do that all the time, but the ability to do that makes that Aquaman really good. And I guess the other thing too is, if you're talking, depending on what you're doing, I think in Phantom Zone at least, for satisfying some of the tasks, I like Aquaman only because his special one is fast. It's one hit. It's a mini game that doesn't take a lot of time. You're just picking the aim. You could just shoot it immediately, and in that way, I actually like that kind of play better. Because some people would even say Zatanna's great because her damage over time, I can't remember whether special 1 or special 2, happens so quickly and it does so little damage that you could satisfy the there's one task in the Elite Crystal that's 120 damage over time effects, that if you've got a character like that, you can actually be even better. So I mean, it really depends, right? If you're looking at really straightforward way that it's multiplayer, you just want to be able to do the most damage, you want to win the most games and fastest, I think Arkham Knight Catwoman. Yeah. Absolutely. If you're thinking about satisfying Phantom Zone, maybe Aquaman's in some situations a little bit better, but definitely if you want to have mess around and have a little bit of fun. There's some things that Aquaman can do because of Atlantean Hero that Arkham Knight Catwoman can't.
So there we go. But a lot of those, as you can see, are not based purely on the damage over time. It's the other stuff that actually ends up making one better than the other.
Yeah, and we can't entirely forget. I mean, there's some other guys that are great at damage over time, like Arkham Origins Joker, the Scorpions. But I think the best is to me is still Bleed, because it gives you so many more. It gives you so much more potential for bringing the other teammates to benefit from it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So we've got our next question from Duck XMS, and this one I think is a really interesting one. Since you and Bug Hunter are both small-scale content creators, do you think you guys relate better? This is another quick plug to Bug Hunter. Please listen to Bug Hunter. He's so good. If you have to listen to Bug Hunter, if you have to listen to either the rest of this podcast or a couple songs from Bug Hunter, like, listen to those. It's a no-brainer. Well worth your time. Love that man's music so much.
Yeah.
But you know, do you think we relate better? And I think the answer is yes and no, but mostly no.
Yeah.
So I think one of the things that we can relate to is what the economics of what we're doing look like.
Is it that we relate to it, or do we just understand it?
We understand it, maybe. Yeah. Yeah, I think we probably don't relate to it, actually. That's a good point. So we understand it. We understand sort of like at the scale that we're at, what the numbers mean, what's sort of important in terms of numbers, the way that you want to sort of grow your audience and everything like that. But in every other way, I think Bug Hunter is doing something so much better than what we're doing here.
Right. I mean, it's a matter of a difference in talent, a difference in skill, and a difference in dedication. And
also like a difference in level of audience engagement. Yeah. Like he has, when he did his Kickstarter or Indiegogo or whatever the program that he used was, to fund the new album, he got like $10,000 raised for it.
Right.
And that's because he makes stuff that people can be really, really passionate about.
Right.
And will pay $10,000 to get him to record, you know, his new album in his studio.
Right.
Which, you know, is great, and we're really happy for him. And I think for what we're doing here, we get more support than we would have ever expected. Especially including direct financial support from people. Like the amount of money that people give us on Patreon is, you know, consistently surprising and really sort of cool to us. But it's obviously a very different scale, right? When we're talking about somebody getting like $10,000 in like a month and a half or whatever. Right.
And I think, I mean, you put it way more diplomatically. I just think way more than we deserve. Yeah. That for what we do, it's not anywhere close to, I mean, whether we're talking about what goes on behind the scenes in terms of the work that's put in, we're talking about the product, or we're talking about even the possibility of scaling up and making a living at it. Completely different things. I mean, you can say anybody who's not on the cover of Rolling Stone and making millions of dollars is a small creator, but there's still, even within small creators, there's like a huge difference, a disparity between us and Bug Hunter.
Yeah, I will be surprised if our audience doesn't continue to slowly shrink, and I will be mad if his audience does not grow significantly. And yet, so, you know, the way that he releases stuff much less frequently, but that has much more work put into it, has a much higher level of polish, and is, you know, like it's a product that's consumed in a very different way. I think, like, the only similarity that we have is that you can see both of our stuff on Spotify, right? Like, I think... Like, other than our approximate size, I think that's, like, the only other thing that we share in common, and in a lot of ways, like, the production side of it is totally different.
Right.
I think the thing that we understand most is the excitement about having positive interactions with people who like your stuff.
Right.
I think I understand where he's coming from, the way he's so accessible.
Right.
I really sort of understand that sort of like emotional backing to that, because we feel the same thing in, you know, what I imagine is a very similar way. But in terms of the actual like content production, it's totally different.
Right.
Yeah, huge amount of respect for what that guy does. He is so clever.
Respect. Yep.
Yeah. So I guess that ended up just us being mostly talking about how great Bug Hunter is, but, you know, he's great. He's pretty great, to be fair. I meant everything I said.
Yeah, he is pretty great.
Yeah.
I love that concert that he did for us.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So there we go. Anything else you want to say about?
No.
Okay,
No.
cool. So our next comment comes from Oliver Cawrey, and they say, not gonna lie, kind of love how you guys are just unashamedly biased with your political views. Lots of people tiptoe around it, but you two just go for it. It's definitely refreshing. First off, I want to say thank you. And the way that you phrase this, is pretty nice. I think it's fair. I want to say I understand why a lot of people don't talk about their political views.
Yes.
Because, unfortunately, people who are making stuff unrelated to politics run a really strong risk of losing swaths of their audience whenever they make any political stance.
Yeah.
And so for anything that isn't something that's really important to talk about, for anything that, isn't like a stance that is causing harm to people's lives and is in the public discourse, I understand why most content creators would shy away from it. That's the cool thing about being small and not having anything to lose and being anonymous is I don't care how mad somebody gets at my political views. I'm going to say them because I can. There's very low cost to me saying them.
Is it just that we're small, or that we don't have aspirations of making a living at this?
That's true. Yeah.
I'm
also never going to go into anything where I think people digging up my old political views at the age that I am on like a random podcast that got 300 views are going to sink my career.
300 would be optimistic.
Yeah, that's okay. Well,
but I mean, Michael Jordan famously said even Republicans buy shoes too. Because Michael Jordan was famous for not getting involved and not taking a side and not being political.
Yeah.
And so maybe I'm going to bring it around back to Ada Palmer again, because she did this really interesting series on YouTube, and I should link to this if I can remember, about censorship. And one of the points that she made, and I'm going to screw this up because it's been a while since I watched those videos, was that a big part of the censorship that we don't see is self-censorship. And that when there were times in history where the people in power wanted to control what people were saying and reading and thinking, that instead of trying to control everything that was coming out, what they would do is make very public examples of the kind of things that they didn't want to happen, persecute those people, so that a lot of the other content creators would feel scared of doing the same, and they would censor themselves. And so that stuff just never got created because of the environment that was created by the very public persecution of prominent individuals.
Yeah. Yeah, so I think, like, at the end of the day, I mean, it's pretty obvious that we have pretty left-wing politics. And I think another one of the reasons that I'm more willing to share my own political opinions is because I'm not talking about stuff that I don't feel strongly about.
Right.
So, just because we are both, varying degrees of left-wing on varying issues, it doesn't mean that we're gonna be pro anybody left-wing and support any sort of, like, anything that comes out of the mouth of a liberal. I think we try to develop our own nuanced views of stuff, and they are very strongly informed by other people's opinions and the other people's opinions that we read, but they also are informed by our own thinking. And I think it's a lot easier for me to be able to talk pretty strongly about all the stuff that we do, because it's all stuff that I believe in,
Right. Right.
And it's all stuff that, even if where my opinion is basically just a ever so slightly modified or parsed version of somebody else's opinion on the same topic, that I sort of understand and agree with it myself. And other people can agree with us, they cannot agree with us. We also appreciate how we are unabashedly biased, because I think a lot of times it is very misleading and bad to try to take that really strong middle ground on every stance, like the both sides have points, because sometimes both sides don't have points. Sometimes one side is right. And I will say that there's a chance that sometimes my side isn't as unambiguously right as I believe it is. I know everybody runs into that issue. I'm not saying that I'm right all the time, or that I'm even right more often than the average person, because I don't know if that's true, but I know that I am going to talk about unashamedly how I feel about things, because that, when I talk honestly, openly, and with enough detail that other people can tell me I'm wrong and why I'm wrong, it means that, I'm either right or I have the opportunity to get meaningfully challenged and have my ideas develop. And I think that's good.
Right.
Always. Always, always.
That's a nice way to end this.
So we're out of time. So we reached that. So the last couple times we've talked about stuff like this, I say sometimes, like, I don't know if we reached a good conclusion, but I think that's a great conclusion point.
It was, yep, absolutely.
So there we go. We have some people to thank. So first off, a shout out to Eliza Corporate Shell Caton. Stop trying to get me to sign up for the service your work sells. This shout out has been brought to you by a weird amount of brand loyalty for a summer co-op placement. I'm not going to sign up for it. I don't know. It's money. It's not a service I need. Stop selling it to me. Yeah. We'd also like to thank everybody who's been supporting us on Patreon. That is Console Peasant in Edwoon at the highest tier, last word.
That's Mohammed Albshaiti at the Your Message Here tier. And Shawn Farrell, Daniel Simonson, Aaron Maule, Michael DeVries, Brandon C., and Irvin Ruiz, who support us on the credited level.
And Chris Wolf, Scarlet Danny, Awesome Gamer 241, and Pavu RS at the gratitude level. Thank you all so much for your support. And thanks so much to everybody for watching or listening. We'll see you next time. Komoda.